Good day to you. Welcome to Anagalactic, or welcome back as the case may be. Over here you'll see a diagram to introduce our series, which will begin with superpositional entanglement, which we first need to disentangle. I approach science when it's necessary with definitions. That's the default. That's part of the Polya method, so that's what we're going to do. When you say superposition, do you know what that means? We'll be talking about that so that you do know what it means. Entanglement, do you know what that means? No, because it's the wrong word. If you're using the word entanglement, you've become entangled. It's a cobweb. It's not a scientific term. It's like Big Bang. So that's not a very good word. It does have a history, though, and you should know, so that you at least can credit why anybody would use such a stupid word as entanglement. It comes from the logic side. When the phenomenon, now known as entanglement, was first encountered, it was partially a problem in logic, strictly speaking, mathematical logic. So that's where the word entangled comes from. You could say it's its etymology, that the logic is entangled. Even that is incorrect. The term never should have been used. Entanglement is not the right word. What is the right word? Coordination. Coordination. So I'd like you to memorize that, if you would, so that you will get used to translating that stupid word into a scientific word. Coordination is exactly the right term. So over here again, you will see a polar projection. You notice that there is no Euclidean grid in that picture. In order to see that a little more clearly, there is the background, and there is our moon, so you know how that's superposed using imagery. That is, of course, a picture of approximately the half moon. Now, what we'll be talking about has to do with that circle. So let's turn them both back on so we can just make sure we have a visual clue as to what I will be talking about. Everything in the universe is spherical. There are reasons for using linear geometry, with which you may be somewhat familiar, perhaps in one area or another. But linear geometry is one of the two geometries that the universe will support. There is only one other geometry besides linear geometry. That's been proved. I proved it. There is also circular geometry. Now, you may know that physics discovered sphericity in the 20th century. And you might object to that, so let me clarify that. Science discovered that it can't escape sphericity in the 20th century at all scales. And so this is a massive, massive project, is to convert everything that we know about science over to reality. That has not yet begun. It halted with Albert Einstein because he finalized the linear grid. So that now, due to Einstein's incredible reputation, no one will ever try to correct the system. Whatever that might mean to you, I should at least tell you that that is the situation as it exists. So the only other geometry besides linear geometry is spherical geometry. There will be many, 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 many confusing aspects for you, for whatever I say, however I approach this. And let me remind you, no genius has ever come close to figuring this out. So I will begin by stating what the problem is, because that is the only right way to begin. People may have different preferences. That doesn't matter. I know the right way to begin. So we need definitions, first of superpositionality, and then of coordination. And the title of this is supercoordination, which is simply a conflation of superposition and coordination. And that will end up describing the flight of the photonic, the transmission of light through space. As you may be aware, light has 3 states and only 3 states, 2 of which are dual, and so it really only has 2 states. In 2 states of light, as Albert Einstein proved and got a Nobel Prize for his proof, during which he is the first man to use the modifier word quantum. It was Albert Einstein who coined the word quantum. And if you think you know better than I do, leave a comment. But it doesn't matter, and so I'm just going to state it the way I know it, whether it's right or wrong, since it's imma-fucking-terial. So what we need to do, first of all, is not use the word entanglement. It's a remarkable fact that science no longer has a feedback mechanism to correct itself in any way. And that's going to become obvious as I go through these very, very complicated, extremely complex, baffling, confusing, and ultimately defeating notions. I see it, but I don't see any way that you're going to see it. But I will try my best, and if you don't work at this, you'll never see it. And then you probably won't see it anyway. So superposition does need to be defined. It has been defined rather adequately by the man who practically invented the term, and that was not Albert Einstein. It was a man named Paul Dirac. He wrote a book called Quantum Theory, which is unreadable, except for the first few pages. And you can just tear out the first few pages. The introduction, with the preface, I believe, are valuable. The rest of it is shit. Because Paul Dirac failed, and his book is about his failure. So what he actually contributed, for which in part you could say he got a Nobel Prize. Let me say something about the Nobel Prize. That's shit. Alfred Nobel offered this prize as just kind of a gesture of humanitarian goodwill. It's not an index of anything, except what a few bloated individuals in Stockholm may have guessed at. But it has no value in science. It does have value for the scientist. And Albert Einstein was able to give his estranged wife the money that he promised her for letting him go on with his career without her. All right. So superposition is almost impossible to understand, so you're going to have to listen extraordinarily carefully to what I say about superposition. There is no real way to show this to you in a diagram. It's a concept that has something to do with geometry, which is how we visualize things. But it doesn't have anything to do with mathematics the way it's currently formulated. And as you might guess, the man who formulated the mathematical representation, including the notation, for superposition was, of course, Paul Dirac. So Paul Dirac invented something called bra notation, B-R-A. He knew what he was saying. He didn't care. He didn't care that it means the over-the-shoulder boulder holder. Meant nothing to him. He's impervious to that kind of stupidity. So should you be. You better learn that. So it's called bracket. He thought that was clever. He was a very retiring man, strange in many ways. There's a very good book by a man who really has figured out Paul Dirac. And he wrote The Strangest Man, the perfect title to describe Paul Dirac. A genius, a recluse, a very cultured and very genteel man who wanted nothing to do with anyone around him because they just distracted him from his work. I have the same feeling. Then the other term that we're going to have to define, no matter how much it hurts, you're going to have to do this. And I will guide you through it, and I'm the only man who can guide you through it. Coordination. What word is it that coordination replaces? Okay, You're never going to use that word again. I'm just going to say it one more time. Entanglement is absolutely the wrong word. It's absolutely the wrong word. If this were a religious situation, you would smell the devil's ass. I'll leave it at that. So someone is pulling the wool over someone else's eyes. I think you know who's who here. I'm here to unveil that, to pull aside the veil on reality, science, geometry, mathematics, and finally consciousness. We'll get to that, but not in this video. It's too much. I've discovered too much to be able to impart it in anything other than a month's long series for which you're going to pay thousands of dollars to listen to me someday, except for the simple fact I'll be dead. So I do have a time limit. So do you. So we will have to define coordination. I will do that for you in this video. And we will also have to define superposition, which I will do for you in this video. And then we're going to combine them so that we'll have the language with which to talk about the photon. So we'll begin with a photon, and then we'll go to the electron-proton combination. The electron and the proton have a distinct relationship, don't they? Where does the photon fit into that? Do you have any idea? No, neither do your scientists or physicists. They really don't know what they're doing. There is some kind of guidance being offered to science right now, because you can see that it's on course in several directions in technology. Purely miraculous, absolutely miraculous developments in the technological side of science, none of which is to help humans in any way. It's entirely governmental, which means non-human. So if you still hate religion, good for you. You'll never know the reason for things. But that is what's happening in science. Humans are not in outer space. I don't care how many men or women or dogs are aboard the ISS. So science has two sides, and one of them is evil. And if you don't know that, it's because you haven't grown up yet. We're going to leave that behind, even though I doubt this will do you any good. It's done me so much good, I no longer care to be here. I wish to go on to the next level. That won't be long to come in any case. So I do this not because I like you or I want to give you anything. I certainly don't want anything from you. The reason I do it is I made a vow to heaven, so you're just going to have to accept that. I'm so sorry you had to hear that. But yeah, there are men like me left who actually take their own word seriously. It's not my word, darling. It's someone else's word. Someone you'll never care about, so you don't need to worry about what I'm doing there. But out of the goodness of my heart, I'll just put it that way to give myself full credit for giving you what you don't want or deserve. This is the actual solution to the collapse of the wave function. A rather ridiculous phrase, because nothing is collapsing, and there is no function. So the collapse of the wave function, the only word in there that makes any sense is wave. So we're going to start there. We're going to start out with a wave-particle duality, but not with the double-slit experiment nonsense that all of your stupid teachers begin with, including, I'll just say, everyone who exists today. You'll only get one side of the explanation. For why light is so difficult to understand, it has to do with the collapse of the wave function. There are between 8 and 16 versions of the quantum paradox that I've been able to count. And the reason I have to give a range is it depends on how you separate the paradoxes as they come up, because some might be considered so closely related they're the same. It's all one paradox. And I discovered the key and the secret that unlocks that paradox that Paul Dirac missed, and so did Albert Einstein. And so has everyone since. Let's not forget that. So this is a mass blindness. It's absolutely statistically ridiculous that I achieved this breakthrough. So you're about to witness history, but it's only going to be in your own life. This will never be understood. If you understand it, it will be a miracle. So I will try to make that miracle come to pass, and I have given you my reason. I have no choice. If I had a choice, you wouldn't be hearing this, because I know what I'm up against. However, many scientists have gone through this. It's very similar to a religious experience where you're crucified. Just so maybe, well, never mind. So to get into something you might understand, superposition does need to be defined extraordinarily well. I haven't seen it done. Paul Dirac certainly didn't explain it very well. That's because he wasn't certain what he was looking at. He forced himself to understand it mathematically. And Albert did the same thing when he composed general relativity. Special relativity, he stole. He stole that from Minkowski. And then he spent 10 years trying to figure out the supercalculus, which would address gravity as a spherical phenomenon. And he did so by inventing a strange term, and it's strange to this day, but I'll disentangle it for you. And that is entangled. It's called relativity. It's also called space-time. Space-time is a stupid word. And relativity, you would have to just concede to the human language. He had to call it something. It's good enough. But, of course, I can define it much better. It's strange to be in my position to see through to the solution that Albert Einstein sought, which is much, much, much different than what Paul Dirac sought. These are the two open-ended questions in physics. So I'm now going to give you the geometry, just very simply so it doesn't wear you out. I certainly don't want to confuse you. So Albert Einstein was essentially looking for an integral. Paul Dirac was looking for an infinitesimal. Both are unreachable. And so they were both fools. They were on a fool's errand. However, each one of those men was paid handsomely. They got a lot of gold for what they did. And don't you ever forget that. That these men are not in the industry for charity. They're not trying to spread some gospel. They're making money, just as every other person does. So that is the full extent of my respect for my two teachers, Einstein and Dirac. I got the solutions that neither one of them could get, and that's what I'm going to express to you today. And as you might imagine, since the two greatest geniuses of the 20th century were helpless in front of their supreme problem, each of whom died absolutely frustrated because they failed. Einstein failed. And now he's been crucified in absentia. The Nobel Prize was given to Bohr instead of Einstein. That was in October 2022. Just 3 years ago. You can check my videos on that. It's not over. The people in Stockholm that I make fun of are definitely to be pilloried. That is not an index of anything. They did give the award for the reason that Alfred Nobel, I think, would approve of. But nothing was proved by what Alain and the other two men had measured, which has been measured for decades, to try to prove that Einstein's relativity is violated by the quantum paradox. The question is the quantum paradox part of reality? It's superpositional. It depends on what you mean by that. And you're going to find that that's going to be the answer to almost every question at cutting-edge physics. That whatever question you ask, no matter how rational it is, about the collapse of the wave function, entanglement, superposition, anything you care to name, the flight of the photon, the wave-particle duality, going all the way out to the opposite edge, the cosmic microwave background radiation, the expansion of the universe, redshift, quasars, supermassive black holes, even galaxies, even stars. Anybody who's trying to get the absolute answer so that we actually understand what we're looking at, you're going to find that you're going to have to give the same answer to every question. It's superpositional. There are always two answers, and they always conflict. And I found out the reason for that, and it's the most amazing insight that's occurred since 1900, when Max Planck discovered a new number system, which he did not recognize, although I did. So there's a lot involved here. And superposition, I think, is easier to understand in one sense, whereas coordination is easier to understand in another sense. All right, now we're going to have some diagrams to help us observe this. So thank you for tuning in. Thank you for your patience. You're about to be rewarded. On the screen here, you will see the result of typing in Bošković force curve into a typical engine, a search engine. The diagrams may not be perfectly visible, but I just want you to know that you don't have to wait for me to do this. You can type this in on your own computer. You can even look this up on your cell phone if you have the patience and good vision for it. But I'm going to show you some examples out of this in just a moment in order to lead into our topic. And for now, I'm just going to turn that off so I can talk this over with you so you know what has to happen, so you'll be prepared for this. I want to remind you one last time that the greatest geniuses in all history have been unable to penetrate these two mysteries. What are these two mysteries? Let's make sure we begin with our definitions, as we should according to the Polya method, which I've determined is correct. And Polya is quite famous for having discovered the right method of doing science at the logical level. So I use the top-notch information available in all fields, because why not use the best? If you have the choice between a little scooter and a Mercedes 310, which one would you choose? Well, I suppose it depends on what you want to get done. Maybe the scooter can get through the little narrow alley, whereas the Mercedes could not. So in the Bošković force curve, just so you know why I bring this up, Bošković shows, again, as so often in my research, he discovered something that he was unable to realize what he discovered. That's also true of several other men I could name. But Bošković is well known in Europe now. He's almost unknown in America, except for an amazing man named Prince. And I've talked about him in the past, but it's not particularly germane. Why do I bring up the Bošković force curve? Is because it shows conjugality. It shows conjugality in the correct orientation, really in the correct space. So the way I prefer to begin, to just give you the gentlest possible introduction to what is ultimately the simplest conversion you will ever have seen in your life. The conversion of linear systematic space to universal natural space, including a very gentle conversion to the correct number system, which nobody has yet realized is already in existence and was used by the Greeks. As you can probably guess, this is the Bošković force curve itself, straight from Rüger's edition, his approved edition, called the Vienna edition, 1763, where he drew this himself. This was not done by a computer. They didn't exist in the 1700s. So what you'll notice is a curvy wave. It looks kind of like a sine wave, except where it gets close to the origin over here, where there's a vertical line establishing the vertical axis from the origin. And then you see there's the usual horizontal line. So this is a typical Cartesian grid diagram. Should be nothing strange to you. However, I'm going to show you this is the most extraordinary use of that grid. Now here, not meaning to confuse you at all, you must resist the urge to trigger your I am confused whining center. The reason I have to caution you this way, and I will caution you again, is because in induction, all the trouble comes at the beginning, because you have to say several things at the same time. And humans in general, but Americans in particular, simply are not trained to do that. And so it sounds boring or tedious or awful. It's not being explained right. You blame the professor. That's very common. He just doesn't explain things well. What you're looking at is the result of another search string. And this search string, which I doubt that you can read, is nuclear force. Nuclear force? Well, let's see. I know what I'm looking for, and I'll just show you that I don't see it yet. None of this shows nuclear force. All of this is dog shit, bullshit, horse shit, shit, more shit. Oh, there it is. Hold on. Here it is. Here it is. I'm going to expand this. And now I'm going to scroll down. This is the Wikipedia article. Why was it so far down? Do your own homework. Nuclear force. There's our diagram. Look at that. There it is. I'm showing excitement so that you'll try to imagine being excited. Open link in new tab. Let's do that. I believe it's open image in new tab. There we are! That's what I wanted! Alrighty then, now I'm excited. Alright, I took the liberty of expanding this a little bit, and I'm just going to do so a little bit more. Okay, and now I am fairly certain that you can see this very simple diagram just a little bit better. However, don't worry if you're viewing this on a cell phone or you're otherwise unable to read what's on the screen, because I will be explaining everything. It's quite simple. You can see that this is a simple diagram. Again, this is taken from the Wikipedia article on nuclear force. And I recommend that you read that article. You may even want to put this on pause and just at least read the first two paragraphs of the Wikipedia article on nuclear force. And the reason that I recommend that, I'm just saying make a notation. You may want to look at this, perhaps after listening to this video. What Wikipedia says about the nuclear force. Now, what does this have to do with the Bošković force curve? I think you recognize instantly what it has to do with the Bošković force curve. This is the Bošković force curve. And that has a string of about a dozen extremely important notations after it. I've given several video presentations on this curve, one of which got 1,750 views in 3 days, including the attention of some top-notch mathematicians, who lost interest rather quickly because I made a valence error. And I apologize for it, but I had already lost my audience. What's amazing about that, I would say ironic, is the mistake that I made in valence, getting plus and minus opposite for the strong force, because it's opposite from the electron-proton relationship. And this force curve describes either one of those, but the valence is inverted. Already a profound... If you don't understand what I'm saying, get used to that. You're not going to understand much of what I say unless you listen to this video over and over and over and over. And even then, I would bet money that you'd never understand. But don't forget, no genius has ever been able to penetrate this secret, only I have. So if you do have the patience, really the faith now, or you could even say hope. What are the gifts of the Holy Spirit, which you may not even believe in? You may want to start believing in it now because you're going to need it. I do present this correctly, and I do present it cogently, but it's almost impossible to present at all. And so you're looking at a super fucking genius. And if you don't like that, goodbye. That's what you're going to have to put up with me from now on. So that is part of the Bošković force curve, and you may recall that looks just like the innermost curve of those waves that you saw. I pointed out that as those waves proceed this way toward the center, it ends in one last wave with a dip going down. Goes down like this on the Bošković force curve. This is the last of the Bošković force curves. You saw there were multiple curves. That's because it shows the electron-proton relationship for the force shell system, which Bohr discovered. So Bošković got it first. Somewhat over a century before Bohr. Actually, more like a century and a half before Niels Bohr figured out the shell structure, which defeated Rutherford and the so-called plum pudding model. And it's fully accepted to this day. There's been no variation in that geometry that Niels Bohr discovered. And this is the direct result of that geometry. That there's this force curve that actually describes the geometry. You'll notice that this is the simplest possible curve. This is actually an inside-out circle. I discovered this. Now, Bošković knew that he was onto something, but he had no way of validating what he could see because the particle had not even been discovered. We're talking about 1760s, okay? He actually came up with this idea closer to 1750, and he worked on it for the rest of his life exclusively. And he's the greatest scientist who probably has ever lived. And I'll show you why. Now, the short reason why I recommended that you read the Wikipedia article that goes along with this diagram is that Wikipedia will really soothe your soul. If you're confused, if you're baffled, if you're frustrated, I strongly recommend that you read at least the first paragraph or two of the Wikipedia article on nuclear force, because you'll find out you're not alone. Wikipedia states at the outset they don't know what the fuck anybody is saying. They start out by saying this needs to be disambiguated because nobody knows what they even mean by the strong force. Now you notice that Wikipedia says nuclear force rather than strong force. And the reason they do that is because of the standard model particle physicists who are literally psychotic. And I've given several videos on that. It's important to realize that your scientists are out of their minds. So, what does this have to do with the nuclear force? And what is the nuclear force? I am going to go way beyond Wikipedia in disambiguating this for you. And that will entail leaving out about 9/10 of the information that you actually need. And that's what I'm going to be doing from here on in. I'll be giving you the top 1% or 10% of what you actually need to know to have a complete picture. So what I'll be giving you is a coherent picture that's optimized for your attention span and your ability to get this at all. This is the simplest of the Bošković force curves. And it describes two completely different things depending on which two particles they are. And I'm not going to discuss that because it would confuse you too much. This is already going to confuse you out of your mind. But I trust that you're willing to try because that's what you need to do to get this. I've got it, and I'm assuring you that this can be comprehended easily. but it's extremely difficult at first. It's just the opposite of doing a computation, where all you have to do is do the mechanics, which are then more tedious than anything else. But in induction, it's inverted. And all the hard work comes in just opening your mouth to say anything. Because we're dealing with a paradoxical situation, I'm sure you're aware of that. So what does this signify? It depends on the interpretation, but I'll tell you what it actually signifies since I actually know. And here you have to trust me. Because if anybody contradicts me, it's because I'm right and they're wrong. But I want to add something to that so you won't think that I'm just being pompous. It's superpositional. There's more than one way of interpreting. Everything that you're going to see from now on can be interpreted in two ways. Okay, so what's the right way to see this? The right way to see this is how Bošković describes it, but it uses the same terms that Bošković used. There are two axes, which each must have a metric, which means what are you measuring? So there's the horizontal aspect. What are you measuring on the horizontal aspect? And then you have to turn to the vertical aspect. You cannot take it for granted that the vertical axis is exactly the same as the horizontal, as they taught us in first and second and third grade. In this case, they're not. This is a secondary use of the plane graph. This is not a Cartesian grid. And you'll see that the two axes are labeled differently. So the horizontal aspect is LSS. That stands for linear spatial separation. We call it distance. So I'm just going to call it that from now on. But you should know that the only correct term for this metric on the horizontal aspect is called linear spatial separation. All three words are critical. We abbreviate it distance. And that is accurate as long as you remember that that's what distance means, because you're going to find out that you're going to slip up if you don't have extremely precise definitions because of the two different ways of seeing things. That'll be your biggest challenge throughout this, is to finally suddenly have a synthesis where you're able to see superpositionally. So you'll know the mistakes that your scientists and mathematicians have made. At the same time, you see more than they could ever see, or more than they ever will see. Science will never understand this because it has no feedback mechanism. And there's nobody powerful enough, like for instance, Sir Roger Penrose should probably be nominable as the emperor, just so we can have a convocation of scientists where decisions are enforced, so that we can change 2 pi to tau. We can change the Big Bang to some realistic name like the null universe. And we can just change the term biological evolution or just evolution to speciation and just fix all the flaws. That will never happen. So I don't want to sound hopeless, but this, you will actually see that this is good, because you'll be able to completely discard the stupidity of your ancestors. So there are two ways of viewing this, but I'll tell you the correct one. The horizontal aspect is linear spatial separation between two particles. In the Bošković force curve, that's all he said, is because he didn't know that there was an electron and a proton. Those are the two particles in the atom, as you know. But he didn't know that the atom had not been discovered. So how he figured this out is really an amazing thing. But he did, and he drew this exact curve to describe the general relationship between two particles at closest proximity. So he was dealing with quantum mechanics. And he did a better job than anybody ever has since. He got it right. He just couldn't prove it because there's nothing in the physical universe that had been discovered. If If Bošković were alive today, there wouldn't be a quantum paradox. There wouldn't be quantum mechanics, because he would show everybody what they've missed. Well, now it's up to me. So I've got to fill in Bošković's shoes. What you're looking at are two conjugal infinities. So what is the vertical aspect? It's force. So this is the direct relationship drawn as a curve between force and space. Not between time and space, which Albert Einstein proved have an orthogonal relationship just like this. This is an orthogonality. Look at the horizontal aspect and notice how the blue line kind of glides. It kind of glides up and never touches the horizontal line. That's called an asymptote. And so that asymptote, which is a combination of the two lines, one of which is not a line if you insist a curve is not a line, but if you do prefer the split definition of the line, the asymptote is both lines, because you should say an asymptotic relationship. And strictly speaking, one of the lines has to be a straight line because that's the coordinate line, and that represents space, as we just said. What does the blue line represent? You have no idea, and don't try to guess. All right, so what is the vertical aspect? You don't see any vertical lines because this is not a Cartesian grid. And there's only one horizontal line. The rest is just a metric. And the reason I say that is I want to ask you a quiz question just to test to see if test yourself to see what kind of insight you have. Where in this graph or diagram is space? Let me give you the answer. It's only the horizontal line. It's nothing above or below it. So this is a rudimentary space-time diagram, except the vertical aspect is not time, it's force. So now let's turn our attention to the vertical asymptote. This diagram, because Wikipedia is just as fallible as anybody else, they left out the asymptote. One aspect of the asymptote, the way I just defined it. Going off into spatial infinity, you can see that this goes to spatial infinity, correct? So where does that blue line finally touch space? It doesn't. That's the nature of an asymptote. You can see that it curves, and it keeps getting a narrower and narrower curve. It will do so unto eternity. So that's a very, very good definition of infinity. That it's the asymptotic relationship between this kind of a curve, represented by the blue line, and the straight line, which here represents space. And the only space on this diagram is that horizontal dotted line. I don't know if you can tell it's dotted. Now the vertical asymptote will be, and I do have a pointer, so I'm going to use this now. I think you can see that pointer. Here is the blue line, which this is the origin. What's at the origin? A particle. Does that make sense? No. So why do I say it? Because it's superpositional. Get used to that. It's going to be a real key to your insight if you can get used to that. What is this? It's a proton, but it's not. It's the center of a proton. What kind of a center? Any kind. It is the center of the proton. You could go one step further if you want to be absolutely precise. It's the spatial center of the proton. That can be computed geometrically. So that's why it says 0, which is something that does not exist, either as a number or as a point. So that's where the proton is. And why isn't it an electron or a photon? It's because an electron and a photon do not occupy space such as to make a spatial position. That's well known, but it's part of the paradox. So just accept that for now. It will become clear later. So that's one particle. Isn't that interesting? And it has to be a proton. So this is fixed for all atomic relationships, either for the proton-proton or the proton-electron. It's the proton-proton is the strong force, the way I define it, which was the original definition. That's been changed by the SMPP. They're maniacs. They don't believe anything they say. There's no such thing as the standard model of particle physics. I have the standard model, and it's the only standard. Theirs is psychotic. They're working for the government. Don't forget that. That's not a human organization. You really might want to think about what I just said, but I know you won't, so that's okay. I'm very compassionate as I approach death. I'm not out to save you at any cost. If you want to die, good. So you'll never understand that aspect of reality. But the standard model of particle physics is an illusion. I have the standard model of particle physics. There's actually only one particle, but it's superpositional. And there would be two if you see it the other way. Is the photon a particle? Yes and no, but it's really the most refined example of superposition, and that's one of the themes, so we can define what superposition is. It's perfectly defined in the answer to the question, is a photon a particle? Here's your first quiz. Is the photon a particle? A, yes. B, no. C, superposition. It's C. A is wrong. It's not a particle. B, although it is if you look at it a different way. So, is the photon a particle? The correct answer, more fully explicated, would be A, yes and no. B, no and yes. And C, superposition, yes, no. All three are correct. Because superposition, yes, no, means either yes, no, or no, yes. In combination, just like the Schrödinger cat paradox, where the cat is both alive and dead at the same time. You now know how to solve that paradox so that people can stop killing cats. And Schrödinger meant that to lampoon quantum mechanics itself, which he hated. He hated quantum mechanics. And Schrödinger was one of the most brilliant. He was second only to Dirac. So the vertical asymptote, which I will now show you, is right. See that arrow going up? It can't be here because that's where the blue line is. So it's right about a little bit to the left. Exactly as if you took this asymptotic relationship, I think you see the two lines, converging to infinity. They're not parallel and they're not intersecting. That's the definition of non-Euclidean geometry. And everything in quantum mechanics is non-Euclidean, which should raise some questions in your mind about the sanity and really even the intelligence of mathematicians. How stupid can these men be? They're operating under a certain spirit, and I'm sorry to offend you. So if you take this and turn it 90 degrees this way, you'll see that it's exactly the same curve. And those are two asymptotic relationships that are perpendicular. And this range in here, somewhere in here, is the quantum. And I'll show that to you. That may not make a whole hell of a lot of sense. Nothing will, for a very long time. You're going to be so confused and so mixed up by all of this that you may lose your way and you may lose interest in what I'm saying. I hope not. I'm going to do my best to give you all of this, but that's all the energy I have time for right now. I just showed you the conjugation of two infinities in quantum space that defines the relationship either between two protons at closest range or a proton and electron, which defines 99.9% of all the matter in the universe, which is simplex hydrogen. That's known. So this is the diagram of hydrogen. It's the dynamic relationship between the particle, which is the proton, which I proved, and the antiparticle, which Paul Dirac did not discover. The electron does not have an antiparticle except it's superpositional. It actually does have two antiparticles. One according to a linear construction, which is an illusion. The positron is an illusion, and I'll show you that too. That may sound like heresy. Certainly the particle physicists would kill me in cold blood if they could get away with it for saying that and being believed. So this is highly dangerous. But I'm not worried, and you shouldn't be either. Nobody's going to hurt anybody. But they are wrong and they are insane. That's very important to just keep in the back of your mind. I am the only non-psychotic mathematician alive right now. Because mathematics is superpositional, and I'll be showing you that. It's because there are only two geometries in the universe, and there has not yet been a man intelligent enough to see the correct geometry. I'm the first, and that's 50 minutes. I'm exhausted because I'm trying to help you so much, and I will continue to do so until it kills me. I don't expect any reward for that. I'm not looking for sympathy. I'm just telling you why I have to turn this off for a short period of time. It's because of health issues. So thank you for tuning in. I'm very glad that you have the courage to listen to a maniac such as myself. But mania is superpositional also. Because wasn't Jesus a maniac? Sure he was. But was he evil? No. There are good maniacs and there are bad maniacs. At this time of year in my family, my two sisters and I, who were within 3 years of each other, used to watch The Wizard of Oz every year, where it would change from black and white to color. I actually have lived long enough to be in the black and white TV era. And then we were one of the first people on the block to get a color TV. I love to tell stories. I'm trying to close in on 55 minutes to an hour. Thank you again for tuning in, and thank you for your comment, whoever it was. Go ahead and leave more comments. I really enjoyed your comment because it got me off of my drift mode. It's quite dangerous to work alone to the extent that I do. I've worked alone since my wife died of cancer 16 years ago. I turned to astrophysics expressly so I wouldn't lose my fucking mind. Because we had a perfect marriage, unlike yours or your parents or anyone you know. My parents had a perfect marriage, like father, like son. I had a perfect marriage. You never will, and you don't know anyone who does. And good luck with that knowledge, because I don't give a fuck what happens to you, your wife, your sister, your daughter, or anybody else. And I want to leave you with those happy thoughts, because you need to get off of your emotional rocking horse and stop letting people push you. I'm talking to myself as well as to anyone else. Even the master needs to be reminded from time to time. God is logical. I'll be right back with you with more offense to torture you and make you sad until you get this. And if I could, I'd probably beat you. So I'll see you soon. Thank you. I'm about to start coughing, and then I'll probably vomit. Thank you. Good night.